Before the communist authorities began hunting them down and imprisoning them, before the waves of propaganda, before the torture and the piles of burning books, before everything, Falun Gong was an ordinary part of Chinese society, and practitioners of Falun Gong were ordinary people. But in extraordinary situations, ordinary people are capable of extraordinary things. In 1999, on the eve of the millennium, the 100 million practitioners of the Falun Gong meditation practice would play the lead roles in a drama of life and death. A drama set on the stage of China, before the audience of the entire world.
In the West, we think of China as a bit of a police state and so on, but we don't really imagine what it's like when that police state uses its muscles.
But what attracted those 100 million people to Falun Gong in the first place? And in the face of life and death, why would so many refuse to give it up? The answer is buried in the 5,000-year history of China, a history that was destroyed in the 20th century, but brought back to life in the hearts of millions of ordinary people, a history that formed the soul of a nation. '20th century China is defined by change. Before the communists came to power in 1949, China had already gone through revolution, civil war, and occupation by the Japanese. After the communists came to power, China went through numerous political campaigns that resulted in tens of millions of unnatural deaths. The most well-known is the so-called Great Cultural Revolution, when even people who didn't consider themselves political were butchered on the streets. Fear reigned, and the whole country was in the grip of Mao's personality cult.
The Cultural Revolution started to affect me when I was 9 years old. I have 4 siblings and I'm the oldest daughter. The nanny we hired was driven out because the party labeled it bourgeois. My parents were both working, so my mother told my brother and me to cook. I was 9 years old. My brother was naughty. He helped me cook one meal and then refused to do any more, so all of the chores fell on my shoulders. Then my father was persecuted and sent to a labor camp, so my family was separated and we couldn't stay in our home anymore. We went to my mother's school, which was very cold. I developed rheumatoid arthritis, and it's followed me through my whole life. I tried lots of different types of medicine, both Western and Chinese.
The generation that grew up during the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and the 70s is now nearing retirement. But even today, the political campaigns of the past are a taboo subject in China.
My parents always taught me to be a good student and to serve society, and because of my behavior, I was appointed class president and given the title of Young Pioneer and Little Red Guard. At one point during the Cultural Revolution, we were sent to the countryside and our education was suspended, and then I longed to return to school. I then worked very hard and joined the Communist Party.
Li Wei-shun was born in northeast China, in the city of Shenyang. A wife, mother, and former sales manager, she now lives with her son in New York.
In the Northeast in winter, the temperature drops to minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit. My wrists and fingers were red and swollen, and I had deep frostbite that went through the flesh, revealing the bones. After I got married and had children, I couldn't bend my back. Once I bent down, I couldn't straighten my back. When I held my child, my wrists hurt terribly. I had heart problems too, and drugs just didn't work. It was at this time that I first learned about Qigong.
She found that slow-moving Qigong exercises helped relieve her arthritis pain, and that they worked better than the Chinese medicine she was taking. In 1996, she learned Falun Gong at a park in Shenyang.
My parents didn't know much about Buddhism, and I'd never learned about it because the party had always brainwashed us with atheism. But when I practiced Qigong, I could personally feel that there was something more subtle and more powerful at work. After I began practicing Falun Dafa and started living by the principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance, and doing the 5 exercises, I changed completely, just like in the Chinese saying, overturning heaven and earth.
But in 1999, decades after the Cultural Revolution, Li would once again be persecuted in China, this time for practicing Falun Gong. After being tortured, she fled to Tibet and Thailand before coming to the United States. Both she and her son are now UN-protected refugees.
Something was wrong. There was some trend that was a little bit off about China's rise. China was advancing. Economically, they were advancing, or at least half of Chinese society was really beginning to start to feel that lift. More cars, more houses, more everything. What you have in China is sort of a facsimile of a thoroughly modern state. But there are certain things missing from it. The ability to talk about the kinds of horrible things that go on in China every day, and, of course, the horrible things that have taken place in the past.
The horrific violence of the Cultural Revolution raged like a fire consuming Chinese society. But out of the ashes, a new China emerged. Business-minded reformers rose to power, and a new period began known as the economic reform and opening up to the West. Some people who were persecuted in the Cultural Revolution were reinstated, but there was basically no attempt to prosecute the crimes of the Cultural Revolution or to heal the scars it left on the people who lived through it.
I mean, this is a country with, approximately a third of the people have gone through the Cultural Revolution and were made to do terrible things during the Cultural Revolution. They simply can't talk about it. I mean, there's no ability to air this.
As the 20th century wound down, the period of reform died, along with thousands of student protesters during the Tiananmen Square massacre. The massacre was another turning point for China. Some of the leaders of the economic reforms were ousted, and those who supported the massacre, including Li Peng and Jiang Zemin, ascended to the throne of the Communist Party. 10 years after that, Jiang would be involved in another crackdown.
He single-handedly ordered the persecution on July 20th.
And the past would repeat itself once again. But the true cost of the Cultural Revolution can't be measured just in the lives that were lost. Neither can it be measured in the loss of countless cultural artifacts. The most significant legacy of the Cultural Revolution has been that it created the culture of the party, a culture based on fear and corruption. Mao turned on those closest to him. His personal assistant and chosen successor were ousted. And then even the leagues of Red Guards who idolized him fell out of favor. Mao was a god in China, infallible, but the millions of people who had dedicated their lives to the party felt betrayed, felt that nothing could be trusted. It was a country turned hollow, a nation without a soul. The Cultural Revolution ended with the death of Mao in 1976. But as the dust and debris settled, the destruction of China's traditional culture left a void in its society. Over the next 10 years, economic reformers in the CCP would open the country to foreign investment and trade, and slowly that void would be filled by money. As the saying went, to get rich is glorious. The cult of Mao had converted to the gospel of the dollar.
I was working in exporting, so I saw who was really making money from exports. It was those children of senior officials. These were the people who really made money.
Zhou Yuyun is from the southern Chinese city of Guangzhou, now one of the wealthiest cities in China. She learned Falun Gong in 1998 outside the Guangzhou Zoo.
On that day, after I finished a meal at a restaurant, I went out for a walk around the south gate of the Guangzhou Zoo. That's when I saw a bunch of people practicing Falun Gong. I thought it was interesting in that their movements were very graceful, so I walked up to have a closer look.
Ironically, Qigong became popular at around the same time as the new economic reforms. Based on traditional Chinese practices, it was, in a sense, the opposite of the new China, a relic of China's traditional spiritual culture, and some people found it filled a void in their lives that money couldn't.
So, of course, you can make a lot of money through doing things against your conscience. In any given workplace, out of the 5 leaders, 4 of them would be corrupt. If you didn't report them and just wanted to do a good job yourself, even that would not work. They would be afraid of you and would gang up and attack you. Only if you join them in their corruption, only then would their minds be at ease. So at that time, for me, I really felt that living wasn't interesting. Like Teacher Lee said, I really couldn't have 3 good days in a row. So when all of a sudden you come in contact with Falun Gong, you understand so many things.
But if there was a spiritual side to Qigong, there was a practical side as well. China ended fully subsidized healthcare in the early 90s. There were many stories of Qigong practitioners recovering from illnesses, and many people came to Qigong not for a spiritual outlet, but out of desperation.
Because of my poor health, I had practiced other kinds of Qigong. So it was by chance that I went to the park, and on the one side, there were people doing some dancing exercise, and on the other, there were people practicing Falun Gong. After I learned the exercises, when I was doing the second one, they were doing this one last. So I stood there in the holding the wheel stance. When I was in that position, I had this feeling of happiness and joy emerge from the bottom of my heart. And it was like nothing I'd ever felt in my whole life. My mouth just turned into this big open smile, and I was trying not to laugh out loud.
The movements of Falun Gong, also called Falun Dafa, were quite simple. 5 Qigong exercises that anyone could learn. And despite numerous claims of illnesses disappearing through the practice, Falun Gong founder Li Hongzhi emphasized in his lectures that cultivating the heart and mind was most important. To do this, practitioners of Falun Gong were expected to act according to Falun Gong's 3 main principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance. In the course of cultivation, practitioners also generally made lifestyle changes. They would gradually stop bad habits like smoking and swearing, and they had to control their temper. And they had to be kind and considerate to others.
My mother's family was from a scholarly background, and her style of education was more traditional and talked about being tolerant and giving. So even though before I cultivated, I didn't argue or make a scene, I would hold a lot of anger in my heart, and this made my health get worse. After I started cultivating, I stopped being like this. I would be very calm. My husband's mother was also very traditional, and because she was my elder, she would demand a lot of respect and obedience. She liked to eat dumplings, and I would make these for her every week. Also, her health was very bad, and I would, for instance, if her clothes were dirty, I would immediately wash them for her. Before I cultivated, I wouldn't do any of these things for her. I just wouldn't.
In pre-modern China, almost all trades and professions, from medicine to metallurgy, politics, and cooking, incorporated ideas from China's 3 ancient religions: Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. During the Cultural Revolution, Mao saw the spiritual culture as a threat and labeled those ideas as futile superstitions. But people still remembered them.
I read some Chinese philosophy, and I did some Chinese practices, Chinese Kung Fu and Qigong. And through the philosophy and these practices, I came across the term celestial cultivation. And it sounded beautiful to me the first time I read it. And I said, wow, I'd really love to do that.
Traditional Buddhist scriptures talked about cultivating Buddhahood. Ancient Taoist writings talked about becoming an immortal. And the new Qigong books were all talking about healing illnesses and getting fit. But Falun Gong was unique because it made a clear connection between the physical fitness part of Qigong and the spiritual cultivation part of Chinese religions.
Some of the teachings that Falun Dafa has helped me with my family, especially my brothers and sisters, because I have a big family. There were actually 12 of us, and 10 of us are still alive.
Betty Hunter is a research librarian from New York. She learned Falun Gong after seeing people doing the exercises in Brooklyn's Prospect Park.
And when I'm dealing with them, I try to be as truthful as I possibly can based on my understanding. I try to have compassion, which means that I don't meddle in their lives anymore, even my own children. I try to have tolerance. When I think they should be doing something and they don't, I can sort of back away and allow them to do it at their own time. Or if they never do it, it's okay. And I'm especially like that with my grandchildren. And so my children always say, is that the same lady that brought us up? She doesn't look like the same lady and she doesn't act like the same lady.
The founder of Falun Gong, Li Hongzhi, was born on May 13, 1951 in northeast China. He came of age during the Cultural Revolution, and in 1984, when Qigong was becoming popular, he decided to create Falun Gong, a more accessible version of the cultivation practice he'd studied as a child. 5 years later, in '89, Li began teaching Falun Gong to a few students in private. 3 years later, in '92, Li gave his first Falun Gong seminar, introducing the practice to the public. The seminar was held on Li's birthday, May 13, at a school in his hometown in Changchun. In the 2 years from 1992 to '94, Li traveled to almost every major city in China teaching the practice. Although the lectures were before crowds of thousands of people, the practice was mainly spread by word of mouth.
When I was in Thailand, I was working as a kitchen hand in a restaurant. There was a tall, good-looking kid who worked in the kitchen as well. He called me Sister Li. One day he said, "Sister Li, why are you always happy and smiling? And why is your face always glowing?" I said, "I cultivate Falun Dafa." He said, "Oh, so that's how it is." A few days later, he said, "I want to learn Falun Gong. Is this okay?" I said, "Okay, sure."
In the beginning, both the Chinese government and state-run media were largely supportive. State television even featured numerous interviews with practitioners who claimed to have improved their lifestyles and health through the practice.
The changes for myself, the changes for my family and my relatives who see me. It's as though I have been born anew, as though it wasn't me anymore. The me in the past was not like this. In the past I would get drunk, smoke, fight, indulge in food and play. That's the stuff I did.
Li gave his last public teaching in China in 1994, but he continued to write and lecture. He also traveled abroad and lectured in many other countries, eventually settling in New York in 1996, where he lives today. 2 years later, Li's most popular book, Zhuan Falun, was translated into English. Falun Gong's 5 exercises and 3 principles of truth, compassion, and tolerance eventually spread to around 80 countries, and Li's writings have now been translated into over 40 languages. Fueling the spread was Falun Gong's innovative use of the internet. All the Falun Gong books in all available languages, as well as exercise instructions and music, were made available for free online from this source.
I did the search on the internet. To my surprise, 2 things came up. And one of them was Falun Gong, and one of them was a phone number somewhere. I called that phone number and got nothing. And when I went back to the Falun Gong website, I was shocked because everything was free. And I was looking, and every link I clicked into opened up a whole page of explaining exercises and details or lectures, all there for you. And it was all free. And I had been spending so much money and traveling around everywhere that I just started clicking the print button over and over and over again, because I thought tomorrow the promotion's going to be over and this is going to cost money.
Practitioners use other Falun Gong websites to post experiences they've had in cultivation, or works of art and music inspired by the practice. These works are also on display every May 13 when practitioners hold parades and rallies to celebrate what's become known as Falun Dafa Day. The day commemorates Li's birthday and the day the practice was first taught in public. The costumes and performances are done in traditional styles and are intended to showcase Falun Gong's connection to ancient Chinese culture. It's a connection that goes beyond the colorful silks and traditional tunes. Over 2,000 years ago in China, Confucius taught the 5 virtues of benevolence, righteousness, loyalty, propriety, and learning. Buddhist and Taoist scriptures also emphasized different aspects of morality. But during the Cultural Revolution, Confucius was denounced along with Mao's personal enemies, and Mao's theories were taken as the absolute truth. Falun Gong's revival of traditional moral concepts resonated with the memories of a dead history. And in a country that had been violently cut off from its past, Falun Gong offered a way to bridge the gap.
I bought a copy of Zhuang Falun, and I read it all the way home from the park, my hands just holding it up in front of me. When I read the preface in the opening part of the book, it was a shock, something life-changing, like an earthquake. I knew this was exactly what I was looking for. Throughout my life, I had felt I was seeking something, and now I had finally found it. I felt I had come home.
People of different cultural backgrounds all had different understandings of Falun Gong. And the traditional Chinese culture of cultivation held a certain appeal, especially at a time when China was emerging as a global power and when the world was getting to know China all over again.
When I first started to practice Falun Dafa, we practiced in a park in Brooklyn. And many times African Americans would pass by and want to know why would we be practicing something like that when it's Chinese. And we basically try to help them to understand that it's not Chinese, it's not African American, it's not Anglo-Saxon American, it's a diverse practice. And it doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with race. It has everything to do with what's going on with your own life and what you are seeking to understand at this particular time in your life.
By the spring of 1999, Falun Gong had already spread widely both inside China and around the world. But although they didn't know it, for thousands of practitioners in China, their lives were quickly coming to an end.
They took me to another room with no window. One man suddenly grabbed me and pulled me in front of him, and he started slapping my face. He said, "Do you know that I beat Zhong Hongjie to death?" Zhong Hongjie was a Falun Gong practitioner from Tieshi district. When he said he killed Zhong Hongjie, I was shocked and I thought, so this is the murderer. The other man said, beating Falun Gong to death is nothing and is counted as suicide. I said, even if you beat me to death, I will not tell you anything. Then I looked at him calmly. His hand dropped in midair, and it was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop.
In the face of death, some practitioners would give up Falun Gong and some wouldn't. But everyone would be affected. Everyone had to pick a side.
You know, when Jiang Zemin started this persecution, everyone in the government and everyone in the whole China, they have to say, you agree with that or you don't agree with that.
Some would go along with the persecution and some would take a stand against it. Those who stood up for their beliefs endured vicious physical and mental torture. Those who gave in were often forced to persecute others. Thousands were brutally killed, driven insane, or forced out of the country. But in the end, their story would be defined not by persecution, but by faith.
At that time, I was very sad for these people because they were so young. Some of them would call each other big sister, hoping that they can help them in society. Sometimes I think that if their parents knew that, their children would, for just $1,000, do these sorts of things. What their parents would think. When they're not torturing people, they act differently. Sometimes I would look at them and think, they're pretty innocent. But these girls around 20 years old would do those things. You can't imagine it. So at that time, during that process, I didn't feel much for myself. But to see those girls like that, I was very, very sad.
Why do Falun Gong practitioners in mainland China keep practicing and not give up under torture? I really hope a lot of them will live through it, and you'll be able to ask them yourself.